So I think we're going to title today's video, The Millennial Disadvantage. That's the first time I've seen that term thrown out there. Today we're going to be covering a story from the Atlantic. You guys know how much the Atlantic loves doing these millennial stories, whether it's how little millennials have in savings, how 2/3 of millennials regret their home purchase, millennials are doomed for retirement. The Atlantic loves doing these articles, and for whatever reason, I like covering these articles. They tend to do pretty well on views, and they tend to get people talking, obviously, I think because most of my audience, including myself, were millennials. I figure we'll kind of cover this story today. I know these articles or these stories tend to run pretty long, so let me just kind of break down what this article is kind of all about and kind of what the sentiment is here, just in case some of you guys don't have time to watch the whole thing, or maybe you kind of get bored or depressed hearing about this. But essentially what this article goes on to say, the author Annie Lowry pretty much goes on to say that in the next recession, millennials are pretty fucked, for lack of a better word. Millennials are doomed. Millennials are already in debt. Millennials are struggling with student loan debt. And kind of why she kind of lays out this case for why millennials are so doomed is millennials graduated into a kind of a crappy economy. So early career progress was kind of slow. A lot of millennials, at a time when they should have been getting started in their careers, were either working like retail jobs, working jobs not kind of in their sector or their industry, or just straight up unemployed. So they kind of missed out, didn't have a strong start to their careers, which is kind of bad. Obviously then, depending on how old, millennials run a pretty wide age span. So depending on, where you fall within the millennial category, you kind of dealt with a very, very bad economy for a while, possibly kind of got your career started through the Great Recession or the Great Recession of 2008. And then during this, the past 10 years or so has been a pretty strong stock market recovery. I think even over, I know the market's down a little bit recently, but I remember looking at some stats a while back, and like, if you had put money into the market back in, I don't know, say sometime between 2014 and 2016, up until today or this recent pullback, you would have been up somewhere near almost 43%. It depends on what you invested in, when exactly you got in, and if you had gotten out at the right time. But, we've had quite a stock market run over the past couple of years, but this article kind of goes on to say that a lot of millennials missed out on it because they just don't have money to invest. They're struggling with student loan payments and debt and other things. And so that's kind of what this article is laying out. Without further ado, let's just kind of get into it. So the title of this article is "The Next Recession Will Destroy Millennials. Millennials are already in debt, and without savings, after the next downturn, they'll be in even bigger trouble." It seems like everybody's waiting on a recession to happen. A lot of people are kind of expecting the stock market to kind of trade sideways for a couple of years. So the article goes on to say the trade war is dragging on, the yield curve is inverting, investors are fleeing to safety, global growth is slowing, the stock market is dipping, the millennials are screwed. Recessions are never good for anyone. A sputtering economy means miserable financial, emotional, and physical health consequences for everyone from infants to retirees. But the next one, if it happens, when it starts happening, stands to hit this much maligned generation particularly hard. For adults between the ages of 22 and 38, after all, the last recession never ended, millennials got bodied in a downturn, have struggled in a recovery, and are now left more vulnerable than other older age cohorts. As they pitch toward middle age, they are failing to make it to the middle class. They are more likely to be the first generation in modern economic history to end up worse off than their parents. The next downturn might make sure of it, stalling their careers and sucking away their wages right as the millennials enter their prime earning years. And, one thing I wanted to throw in here, so I don't like to be all doom and gloom. Obviously the media is all about headlines and drama and doom and gloom. I was just reading, I think I'll share it in another video maybe tomorrow or the next day. I was just reading on one of the, I think it was either like personal finance or one, maybe like Lean Fire subreddits. I was just reading about, I think he was a 31-year-old police officer, and he was contemplating retiring right now, or waiting until age 35 to retire. And he's making 70 grand now, which is, don't get me wrong, it's a pretty good income, but it's hardly rich. And I'm guessing that his income has only recently gotten up to that level. I know, most cops tend to start anywhere from like maybe 46 to 63 or something like that. Earlier in the careers, and then once you get a couple years in, 3 years in, 5 years in, you start getting raises, and cops can get a lot of overtime and things like that. But cops are hardly rich, so for a 31-year-old to be able to retire off having a career of 8 years in the police force is pretty impressive. And he's not retiring off his police force earnings. Pretty much since he started working and got on the police force, he's been dumping money into rental properties. I forget how many rentals he has right now. I think he said right now he's making like $51,000, maybe $55,000 a year off his rental properties, and he's planning on acquiring another rental property, which will bring that passive income up to, I think it was like $71,000 or $75,000. So he's considering retiring. So, well, we're not living in an easy economy. Well, a lot of millennials are struggling. There are people who are having a lot of success. And I think one of the things that kind of really differentiates who's struggling versus who's having success, if you just kind of let life, let your career, let your finances kind of meander like a river and take you where they want to take you, you're probably going to wind up struggling. But if you get a side hustle going, start a side business, start investing in rental properties, house hack, you start trying some different things and doing some things outside the box and trying to make some income outside of your regular 9-to-5 job, and there's a very good chance that you will wind up having some success. So I just wanted to mention that because I don't want people to think it's all doom and gloom and we're all screwed. And then one of the things I think I failed to mention at the beginning of this article was, they said one of the troubling things is, I'm probably between the 30 and 50, 35 and 50 is somebody's like prime earning years. That's when people kind of start rising out of their entry level jobs, taking promotions, getting more into management positions and things like that. And then that's when people are kind of at their highest earning years or their peak earning years. So what this article is saying is because because the economy's starting to look like it might go into a downturn, that if a recession were to happen right now, it would really negatively affect millennials because, layoffs start happening, companies stop giving raises, and we're at a time right now, or a point right now, when millennials are going to be entering their peak earning year. So it would be really negative to have an age group who already has kind of struggled to get started once they're going into an area which is supposed to be their peak, that now the economy faces a downturn. So the article goes on to say it was the last downturn, the once-a-century Great Recession, that set them up on this doddering economic course. The millennials graduated into the worst job market in 80 years. That did not just mean a few years of high unemployment or a couple years of living in their parents' basement. It meant a full decade of lost wages. The generation lucky enough to enter the labor market in a recession suffers significant earning losses that take years and years to rebound from. Studies show something that hard data now back up. As of 2014, millennial men were earning no more than Gen X men were when they were the same age, and 10% less than baby boomers. Despite the economy being far bigger and the country far richer, millennial women were earning less than Gen X women. Kids of the 1980s and 1990s have had new huge financially catastrophic demand on their meager post-recession earnings too. $1 trillion of education debt. About a quarter of Gen X who went to college took out loans to do so, compared to about half of millennials. So you got about double the amount of millennials taking on student loan debt as the previous generation or the Gen Xers. And millennials end up taking out double the amount of Gen Xers. No wonder, given that the cost of tuition has gone up more than 100% since 2001. Think about that. I know 2001 doesn't seem that long ago. However, when you consider it's 2019, that was like 18 years ago. That's crazy. But nonetheless, in the grand scheme of things, for something to go up 100% since 2001 is pretty crazy. The toxic combination of lower earnings and higher student loan balances, combined with tight credit in the recovery years, has led to millennials getting shut out of the housing market and thus losing a seminal way to build wealth. The generation's homeownership rate is a full 8% lower than that of Gen Xers or the baby boomers when they were the same age. The median age of home buyers has risen all the way up to 46, the oldest it's been since the National Association of Realtors started keeping records decades ago. Now, I actually started making a video yesterday. My girlfriend started blowing up my phone and ruined it, so thanks for that. But I actually started making a video yesterday kind of talking about millennial homebuyers. I was watching a Graham Stephan video, and he was kind of talking about a stat, which is a topic that I made a video about maybe, I don't know, a year and a half, 2 years ago, which was about how 2/3 of millennial homebuyers regret their home purchase. And I was actually going to make a video kind of talking about like my experience as a millennial homebuyer, what I'm happy about what aspects of my purchase I'm happy about, which aspects of the home I bought or my home purchase I'm kind of disappointed with, or I wish I would have done differently. And then also I wanted to talk about downsizing, because when I bought my current home, which is only about 1,050 square feet, I had downsized from like a 3,250 square foot house, which was quite a change. So I wanted to kind of make a video about that, since I know a lot of you guys are either just buying your first homes maybe, or in the process of doing so, or looking at doing so. But this article also kind of comments on millennial homeownership rates and things like that. As a result, millennials have not benefited from a dramatic rebound in housing prices that has occurred since the financial collapse and the foreclosure crisis. Millennials have also been forced to shell out hundreds of billions of dollars in rent as housing costs have skyrocketed in many urban areas. Just kind of an interesting side note, I was reading another article this morning that they were talking about how a lot of the rich Chinese have stopped buying houses in the U.S. This gets talked about a lot as like a huge issue, like, oh, all the Chinese buyers are pouring money into the U.S. and driving up home prices and, ruining it for people like you and me. I mean, the reality is there's a couple markets, maybe New York, Silicon Valley, San Francisco, maybe Portland, Vancouver. There's a couple areas where Chinese people are pouring money into very, very high-end housing, but I mean, that's not really affecting the vast majority of people. Total side note there. This represents a large generational transfer of wealth from young to old. Boomers own the houses and bar municipalities from building more of them, thus benefiting from rising prices and soaking up endless rent checks forked over by younger and poorer families. This is kind of interesting. I was looking in the Charleston, South Carolina area, specifically an area called Mount Pleasant, to buy a home a while back, and they've actually put like a complete moratorium on building condos and apartment buildings, and it's because that area has like blown up so much in the it's not to try to lock people out of housing, it's because that area has blown up so much in the past couple of years that just like the infrastructure and things like that isn't really built to sustain that many people, and traffic's nuts. They're having more flooding because there's not as much like wetlands and things like that. Charleston's kind of got an interesting kind of geographic makeup because everything is like islands, and it's called low country because everything's really low in terms of like sea level and all that. But I mean, a shortage of housing like that definitely causes prices to go up. One thing that'll be interesting is, all these boomers with their McMansions and everything, millennials don't really seem to want to live out in the suburbs, don't really seem to want giant houses. It seems there's a movement back to like smaller, more reasonably priced homes. A lot of millennials and Gen Zers seem to want like more unique houses with character as opposed to like tract suburban, cookie cutter built homes. So it'll be interesting as boomers start to want to kind of like get out of the houses that they've lived in for the past 10, 20, 30 years. If there's any buyers for them, will that drive the price of their homes down? So even though this and a lot of other articles kind of make it seem as if like boomers are living high on the hog and poor millennials, I think boomers might not be able to, suck all this mega home equity out of these giant homes that they've built, because there's really not going to be anybody out there to buy them. Even if millennials have the money to buy them, which they don't, it just doesn't seem like that's what millennials and Gen Zers are really looking for in homes. Move back to the article. Cost pressures have also made it difficult or impossible for millennials to save or invest. The share of Americans under the age 35 who own stocks has meandered down from 55% in 2001 to 37% in 2018, in part because employers are less likely to offer retirement savings plans, and in part because millennials have nothing left over at the end of the month to put away. That's one thing. If you can afford it, man, try to put some money into investments. And even if you can't afford it, try to put some money into investments. One thing that you'll realize, if your employer has some type of 401k program or 401k match, definitely take advantage of it. If they don't, set yourself up your own IRA or something like that. I remember, like, even when I was making like $900 every 2 weeks, I was scraping by. I still went ahead and contributed the maximum 6% to the company I was working for at the time, because A, not doing so was like leaving free money on the table, and B, even though I was broke, at some point, when that money just automatically gets taken out of every check, at first you might feel a little bit of a hit, but after that, it just kind of becomes like, if my check was 9 something and now it's, 800 or whatever, it just kind of becomes a norm, and you kind of learn to make do. But yeah, a lot of employers are no longer offering, 401k plans or 401k matches. And I think that was something that traditionally and historically was something that kind of got people in the market who might not otherwise go set up a Vanguard account or a Schwab account on their own and get into the market. Let's see, where do we leave off here? Virtually all members of the cohort are not saving adequately, experts warn, and 2/3 of millennials have zero retirement savings. And just in case anybody's wondering, you should be putting away, I'm hesitant to even say a minimum of 10%, but I would say at a very minimum, like if you're really struggling, put away 10%. Ideally, you should be trying to put away 15%, if not even more, in a retirement savings if possible. Back to the article, this means that millennials have benefited not a bit from a decade-long boom in stock prices as their parents and grandparents have. Millennials are worth less on paper than members of older generations are, and are worth less on paper than members of older generations were at the same point in their lives. The net worth of your average millennial household is 40% lower than that for Gen X households in 2001, and 20% lower than for baby boomers households at the end of the 1980s. Could millennials make up this lost ground? Perhaps if wage growth was suddenly and dramatically accelerated, urban cores start to build millions of new homes, and Congress announces that student loan debt jubilee, but financial experts consider it unlikely. Millennials missed out on a big asset boom that occurred between 2010 and the present, and appreciation is unlikely to be as rapid in the near future as it was during the recent period, argue economists at the Federal Reserve. With the baby boomers occupying most of the top jobs and much of the housing, millennials are doing less well than their parents, concluded Credit Suisse. We expect only a minority of high achievers and those in high demand sectors such as technology and finance to effectively overcome the quote unquote the millennial disadvantage. And here's one thing, I'm a big believer in the idea that, like, when you accept defeat, it's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you believe you can or believe you can't, you're probably right. To take it to like a sports analogy, think about like whether it's a basketball game, football game. Think about a team like, I don't know, say the Patriots or something like that, who, it's halftime, they're down 43-3, and they wind up making a comeback. Do you think if they didn't believe in themselves, they would have made that comeback? And I'm not saying, I am kind of a believer in the idea of like the universe and karma and positive thoughts and The Secret and all that stuff. I do kind of buy into some of that idea, but I think more than anything, what it is let's take it back to that football example. If Tom Brady throws they come back from halftime, they're down. If Tom Brady throws a pass across the middle, and I don't really follow sports anymore, so this is going to be kind of a dated reference, but say like Rob Gronkowski is coming across the middle. If he believes that they can win the game, he's probably going to lay himself out there and catch that ball and take a hard hit and get that first down, and then they start to build momentum, and maybe that comeback happens. But if Rob Gronkowski, if the Gronk, thinks that the game is over and they're defeated, when Tom Brady throws that pass across the middle and he realizes he's gonna get destroyed going across the middle, do you think he's going to lay out for that ball, or do you think he's going to be like, why hurt myself for a game that's already over, and just kind of slow up his pace a little bit and let that ball go by, and they don't get that first down and they punt and that recovery never happens. So a lot of these articles seem to be very doom and gloom and millennials are fucked or whatever else. That's why I kind of like sharing these stories. And like I said, I'll make the follow-up video about the cop. This article, as well as a lot of other people, seem to say that, like, if you're not an engineer, if you're not a doctor, a lawyer, or in tech, like, you have no chance of retiring early or living a good life or living comfortable. And the fact of the matter is that that's just completely untrue when we look at that story of the cop who probably started off making between 40 and 60 and is ready to retire at 31 potentially. Article goes on to say the next recession this year, next year, whenever it comes, will likely make that millennial disadvantage even worse. Already, millennials have put off saving and buying homes, as well as getting married and having babies, because of their crummy jobs and weighty student loans. A downturn that leads to higher unemployment and lower wages will force millennials to wait even longer to start accumulating wealth, making it harder for them to accumulate any wealth at all. Compound interest is magic after all. Their trajectory, already terrible, might get even worse, and millennial suffering just won't hurt millennials. There is accumulating evidence that the economy is more sclerotic and slower growing than it might be if millennials were able to buy homes, have families, start businesses, and spend like other generations. If the young were not existing just to pump asset value for the old, which reminds me, there's one generation that might fare even worse than millennials, Generation Z. And it's one other just interesting point I'd like to make. People talk about millennials aren't buying homes and this, that, and the other. But I think we've seen, I'm sure part of the issue is that millennials are struggling with student loan debt, and millennials just don't have the money to buy homes. But part of it, a lot of studies, a lot of research, a lot of surveys are finding that millennials don't really want to be tied down by homeownership. Millennials don't really want to live out in the suburbs. Millennials don't really want to have yards to maintain. Millennials value experiences more than possessions. And so I think even if millennials were doing more well off financially, I think, I'm sure homeownership rates would increase a little bit, because obviously there are going to be people who are just locked out of the housing market because the housing market's going up faster than wages. Millennials are broke and have student loan debt and everything else. But part of it is just that millennials just don't really want to own homes. They don't want to live in the suburbs, which is where most homes are and where homeownership is cheaper. So it kind of makes sense that millennials are renting and things like that. But anyhow, we always tend to cover these crazy millennial stories. The Atlantic seems to have one every couple weeks. And it seems like you guys are interested in them. I always kind of enjoy these as well. So figure we'd make this video. Stay tuned for the follow-up video if you want to hear about the cop who's retiring at 31 or potentially 35 with an income of 50K or 75K a year, just to give you maybe a perspective that it's not all doom and gloom. And if you do smart things with your money and invest and do some stuff outside of the box and don't expect your 9 to 5 to carry you, that you can have a very nice life and good things can happen to you. So that's all I got for you guys today. I hope you enjoyed the video. Share your comments with us down below, your thoughts. If you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up. And if you're not subscribed, hit that subscribe button down below. Thanks for watching, guys, and we'll catch you on the next one.